which second-year receiver will take the biggest leap in 2023. That and more this week on the couch. We're talking wide receivers. We're talking to Matt Harmon. Matt Harmon, it's second-year receiver week at Reception Perception. Who's going to make the biggest leap?
Yeah, I love this this drop for receptionperception.com because I think as much as people, and shout out to the new subscribers, clearly love rookie content. People love to talk about the rookies and everything. I think you get and I hopefully you agree with me. I think you get so much more and so much better and clearer signal when you can actually like the guy's actual rookie year. And I think it's interesting too, because a lot of people want to stick to kind of the priors of what they thought about folks' prospects and everything like that. But the second year drop, I think, has been the most fruitful in terms of spotting breakouts through reception perception history. If you want to take it back to like Allen Robinson, Stephon Diggs, like their rookie seasons, Tyler Lockett, even Brandon Ayuk, although it took a couple of years to get there. The rookie season, I think, is so fruitful for these guys that are going to take maybe a leap in their second season, or whether it comes in their third or fourth or something like that. Like eventually these guys that show really well as rookies tend to figure it out. And I would say the one guy I think that's going to make the biggest leap is definitely Drake London, because, I say that as like, that's kind of an easy answer, right? Because he went 8th overall in the draft. I think everybody should at least agree that he's good, although it wasn't but like just over 365 days ago we were having discussions about, can Drake London get separation, which I mean it was crazy at the time, and I think it looks even worse after his rookie season. He just checks so many boxes. He's over 70% success rate versus man, he's over 70% success rate versus press, great indicators. But then he's also a guy that finished over 81% success rate versus zone. Like those are just so many boxes that you want to see a guy check who's going to be an outside X receiver. And I think Drake London does offer you some theoretical positional versatility. If you wanted to use him as like a big slot receiver, you wanted to use him close in line, you could do that stuff. But what he did as a rookie was play like the pure number one X receiver role. And he was so good on those in breaking routes because he's so fluid. So to me, I think he already should be considered in a class with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson based on what those guys did statistically as rookies. I think people probably hold them in a higher regard. So I think the easy answer to who's going to make the biggest leap is definitely Drake London.
Yeah. And like you said, Drake London getting a bigger part of a smaller pie in a situation that was not conducive for production, right? Because we can talk about the draft. We'll talk about the rookies. We'll talk about all that stuff. Come on. We got Matt Harmon here. We're going to talk a lot wide receiver talk here. But the problem is that people aren't always adjusting for surroundings. What Drake London did in Atlanta last year with Marcus Mariota, cue the Marcus Mariota overthrown errant pass reel, is more impressive.
It's a long one.
It is. Yeah. Sorry. All of us, me most specifically, mourning Kyle Pitts' fantasy value. Anyway, that's more impressive than what Garrett Wilson did or Chris Olave did, even though the production might seem more impressive. And you get into some topics here, subtopics like how we use production in our models, whether we should use production in our models when we're talking about rookies now, or should college production be considered that much of an indicator when not all college production is created equal, not all production is created equal. I loved, by the way, not stalking or anything, Matt, but when I saw someone said that about reception perception, by the way, if you don't know, if you're listening to this show, if you're watching this show, I'm sure you know about reception perception. If you don't, it's the definitive wide receiver Bible. And someone said that the numbers match the tape, and you said the numbers are the tape. The numbers are actually just observations. You figure out a way to describe them with numbers. So we get hung up on those numbers. And for fantasy, there's always that limiting factor of Desmond Ridder and the offense but an overall, what we usually miss in fantasy, I think, Matt, is that an overall leap in efficiency by the offense, even if it is a run heaviest offenses, is going to be good for everybody in the offense.
And I don't necessarily think this offense is going to be that much boomer ball. Like I think that's because we have such short memories that we forget that we have multiple years of Arthur Smith. And look, there's no doubt he's going to want to lean on a bell cow back. He's going to want to lean on the run game. I mean, we saw it with Tennessee and Derrick Henry. I mean, why wouldn't you lean on Derrick Henry when you've got him in Tennessee? Why, if you take Bijan Robinson 8th overall, you're definitely going to lean on him. But it does kind of drive me crazy that, especially in the fantasy community, like we only focus on this Marcus Mariota year with the Atlanta Falcons. And by the way, if you had, again, we're going to take some shots at Mariota.
Sorry,
So if
Marcus.
Marcus Mariota, sorry, Marcus, but it just is what it is. If you had 2022 Marcus Mariota as your starting quarterback, you would want to lean on the run too. Okay, so I think you know that's what kind of kills me about this, because even if you look back at like the Matt Ryan year with 2021, the Atlanta Falcons and Arthur Smith, they were throwing the ball 33 times a game with Matt Ryan, because Matt Ryan was a real functional NFL quarterback, even if Matt Ryan was a declining player, you know, and they had Kyle Pitts go over 1,000 yards. So I think because the Pitts stuff is so disappointing, I think Arthur Smith gets, and he, you know, he's obviously a cantankerous guy. I'm not sure I'd like want to hang out with Arthur Smith, but I do think his offense is primed to be extremely efficient, as you mentioned. Like conceptually, he was getting Kyle Pitts in positions to get big plays down the field. As you mentioned, the Mariota overthrow reel, a lot of those are Kyle Pitts on the other end of those targets. But, you know, and I guess that brings us to Desmond Ridder. I think based on those last 4 games, you know, and what he and Drake London did together, and especially as I mentioned, you know, you look at Drake London's route success rate chart on reception perception, 80% success rate on digs, 81.8% success rate on curls, 82.4% success rate on slants, like those base NFL in-breaking routes, 88% success rate on the post. Arthur Smith loves to hit those big post throws off play action. He's a natural fit for, I think, what Smith wants the trigger man to be in this offense. And I think the fact that, you know, London started producing in those last 4 games is probably not a coincidence. So I think based on those last 4 games, Ridder can be functional. I'm not sure what you thought of Ridder as a prospect, but I think at least you can get him to, you know, maybe average-ish starting quarterback level. And I think that's probably good enough for them to open up the offense. By the way, Bloom, they threw 28 times per game when Ridder was in the game, as opposed to Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, so there's a little more trust, and there's a lot of good stuff to tease out of what you were saying there. Arthur Smith, if we assume he's a good offensive mind, we shouldn't mistake an offensive coordinator doing what he can do. What can I do with these players versus what they want to do? Or Matt, it might even be safe to say at this point, and we're going to talk a lot. You're kind of I don't see any gray in your beard yet, but in our fantasy football talk media yap world, you're kind of getting to be a gray beard with us, and things have changed. Right? You've been doing it long enough that you've watched some things change, right? Like the mindset or the assumptions you had about this universe, this environment, this ecosystem that you're in and you're analyzing. It's different. It's a different ecosystem. Right.
Yeah.
And I think we came up in an idea that, well, this is what an offensive coordinator does. This is his system. This is what he installs. And there are still people out there in the NFL like that. On defense, maybe it's easier to identify, like Wink Martindale. You know, they're just like, this is my system. These are the kind of players that fit in my system. This is what I ask you to do. And you brought me here to put in that system, like Dick Fangio, you know, some of these old school guys, like, hey, these players are going to work and these players aren't because this is my system. But the good offensive coordinators now probably are doing a mix of what they want to do or what concepts, what things they're fluent in, and what they have. They should be flexible, right? I mean, that's rational.
Right.
So we shouldn't. Go ahead.
No, it's just kind of funny that as you're saying this, it just kind of clicked in my brain that we constantly talk about, good coaches coach to the players on their roster. Right. Like they adjust their system and they adjust their approach to the players that are on their roster. But then, you know, again, I don't want this to turn into like the Arthur Smith defense hour, although I'm going to do this a lot over the summer because I'm very attached to Drake London. I also might have Kyle Pitts on a dynasty team.
Too many.
Too many. But, you know, I think that it's funny we say that, like, this is a good thing the coaches do. They adjust their play calling and they adjust their system to the players that are on their roster. But then when Arthur Smith, as we mentioned, with a non-functional starting quarterback in Marcus Mariota and 3 running backs that were efficient all year long, you know, takes this team to be, I'm pretty sure they were top 15 in offensive DVOA last year, despite these problems. And, you know, then we're like, no, not like that. Don't do it like that. And I think a lot of that is because frankly, what's anti-running back bias and like anti-running game bias has like really seeped in, I think, almost in a weirdly aggressive way into the fantasy football world. That it's like that. We want you,
isn't it? These times.
Yeah. It really is. It's like, yeah, you know, don't do that, but don't do it like that. And it is kind of funny that Smith gets crap for doing that. despite this team being competitive, pretty much all the way to the end of the season, featuring a very good running game with, again, a quarterback that was non-functional. Now, I think you could probably criticize, like, why did it take so long to go to Desmond Ridder? But some teams are just always going to be very conservative with rookies.
Sure.
And usually when you see a rookie quarterback play, you kind of get why that is.
And you're doing it to protect the rookie from himself, right? It's like, why don't you let your 3-year-old cross the street without a parent? You don't want them to get run over, right? And you don't let them cross the street on their own until you think they're ready. So that makes sense. And there's a lot of good sub discussions here again, because with respect, you said, I don't know, you don't know what I think about Desmond Ridder. And I think we have to be somewhat agnostic because, again, it's that imprinting of your early experiences as an NFL quarterback. And I think of Dak Prescott, I think of Ben Roethlisberger. What would they have turned out like if they were thrown into an Andrew Luck situation? Look where Andrew Luck ended up.
Right.
Look where Andrew Luck ended
exactly.
up. So Desmond Ridder is in a very good situation where everything is built around him. It's the Matt Waldman plan. Everything is built around the quarterback, and then we'll wait and see if the quarterback comes along, but we're not going to force the quarterback decision. And that alone could build confidence. And like you said, he can be functional. He can harvest what's there. It's the running back who gets what's blocked, right? But that might be all you need. It's the Kyle Shanahan quarterback. Just if you run the play, Jared Goff, if you run the play as designed and it's there, just execute. That's all.
Color inside the lines, baby.
Yeah.
Just color inside the lines. We're going to get our piece of art.
But it's going to be running. I mean, they went up. I believe they moved up for Matthew Bergeron. I got to mention by Syracuse Orange. They're going to run the ball. They're going to run the ball well with Bijan Robinson, and they're going to use the run to set up the pass. And that's where we're at. And like you said, there's this anti-run bias in some ways, Matt. And it's funny. I'm going to do a little side rant. Indulge me, because I saw the NFL when they cracked down on Jamison Williams and all that stuff, the gambling on team property, and I thought, well, this is really strange considering all of the partnerships they have with the gambling syndicate. And people said, what about the integrity of the game? We have to uphold the integrity of the game. And I thought, well, in the Brian Flores case, it came out that Stephen Ross said, I'll pay you $100,000 for each when you lose to help our draft position. And whether or not that was proven, the NFL just kind of laughed it off, right? Did you notice it was never really denied? Oh, he was joking.
He's like, haha, funny thing to say.
And no one really cared. It didn't even register. Is everyone like, now I don't trust the outcome of games, right? So maybe people are mad about Arthur Smith running the ball because he got W's, right? Because it worked when he should have just been tanking for Bryce Young or whatever. And sometimes when people are doing game theory, I really feel like this is where I'm going to offend some people. I feel like MBA business thinking has invaded NFL football talk a little too much when we get into like Bijan Robinson, right? Positional value, because it's still about getting W's. It's about building a team and building a family and having an ethos and having everybody like buy in and have a group experience. So I agree with you. Go ahead, because you're shaking your head. Because I agree with you. It's a little bit distasteful, that pushback, like you said, aggressive pushback against establishing the run.
I mean, anytime somebody advocates for like, well, they should just tank, it's like, that's not a serious opinion, because it's just so easy to say that on paper, but we're dealing with 53 plus humans that play the game, plus like the entire, like you said, it's an entire organization, and these teams do want to have like a family sort of feel and stuff like that. And the reality is, like, I guarantee you, if you ask any NFL team, like, you have two options. You can spend 1 year of misery, tanking or whatever, which, by the way, is impossible because you can't get the players on board.
Not when it's a commitment, because football is a mind, body, soul commitment every day. And especially when you step on the field.
That's another thing too. Like, again, it's not a serious opinion to advocate for tanking. Like, and let me tell you what, anybody who's ever like talked to players would never advocate something like that, because it's just completely impossible.
Yeah.
And I've definitely been very fortunate in my career, especially the last 6-7 years, something like that, to talk to and get to know a lot of players in the NFL. And it just, it makes you see how ridiculous that sort of statement is. It's like, oh, they'll spend a year tanking or multiple years tanking. People advocate sometimes. And then also, just again, like, my thing here is, like, if you could ask a team, like, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a team that tanks in misery and then maybe you get a quarterback, like, and that's the key to everything? Or do you want to be the Saints? And you're in New Orleans, you
Yeah.
understand this. Like, you want to be the Saints. Like, hey, the Saints do some weird stuff every year to basically probably get a ceiling of like 10 wins and making the playoffs. And really smart people that I respect a lot, fillet them, for it. And I get it. It's such a weird, unconventional thing, but it's like, oh, you've got the ceiling of 10 wins and you're doing all this work, like salary wise, to get to these 10 wins. And like, you're never going to be bad enough to get a franchise quarterback or whatever. Most teams would take that,
Yeah.
honestly, like to just hope you fall kind of ass backwards. Sorry, Joe, into like a Joe Flacco or Nick Foles type run. And then you get from that 10 win ceiling to like, you win a Super Bowl one year. Or the reality is, like, if you're just in that 10 win, 11 win ethos, your fans are going to be having a good time for the most part every single Sunday, and your players are going to be having a good time for the most part every single Sunday. And really, like, I think when you take a big step back, it's like, how many teams are really going to win the Super Bowl in any given year? It's probably like 4 or 5. And then over the course of 10 years, how many are really going to win a Super Bowl? I don't know. There's a lot to say there, but it's definitely kind of a silly notion that I think takes the human aspect out of the game, which these are all human beings that are playing this thing.
Yeah, I got a whole bunch of questions. I'm taking notes and we're not going to even have close to enough time to talk about all this stuff. But it is, to put a cap on that. It's just a fundamental lack of grasping something about what it is that you're actually watching, because we're just seeing a protrusion of it in the games and the production from the games that we're obsessed with. There's so much more, the actual actions like beneath the surface, like the iceberg. Okay, rookies, like you said, not talking about the 2023 rookies, but looking back at the 2022 rookies, you learn so much from that rookie year. I always put it just as simply as, can they play? Can they play? I guess first I'll ask this question, a pointed question. Whose opinion, which 2022 rookie did your opinion change the most from your evaluation to what you just saw winding up second year wide receiver week?
Ooh, that is a good one. I'll probably say George Pickens from the Steelers, because I think, and Pickens, I definitely think is going to be one of the most polarizing players this year. Because I think right now, Bloom, there's probably no wide receiver, who's like not an established star or anything like that. There's probably no wide receiver in the NFL who is more, like, I'm afraid is more overrated by highlight bias and myth making. And what I mean by that is, like, George Pickens at the University of Georgia, he has this great freshman year, and people are like, this is probably going to be the Georgia Bulldogs' best receiver since AJ Green, and then he gets hurt. There's some personality stuff with George Pickens. We know the whole thing. He never actually becomes that guy. So it's like, but that myth stays in the ethos whenever we talk about George Pickens, like as if he was that guy or still has a potential to be that guy, even though you never really saw it. And then definitely at the NFL level, the highlight bias thing, I've talked about this for years. You can talk about it like on Backyard Banter, right? That, like, we see these guys make these absurd contested catches, and you kind of extrapolate that to all of their snaps, even though that's maybe like 4, 5, 6, 7 plays throughout the course of a year, So I think with Pickens, the toughest thing in his reception perception profile from his rookie season, and there was a lot as a prospect to like about Pickens. He wasn't like an absurd separator or anything, but he was very good in that traditional X receiver role on the line of scrimmage, like the true number one type of stuff. The guys like AJ Green that used to play that big true X receiver role, and now we've got number one receivers that aren't necessarily always in that bucket, but Pickens definitely is in that bucket, and he had a pretty good success rate versus press. The prospect actually had a pretty good success rate versus press as a rookie, but he has a 5th percentile success rate versus zone as a rookie receiver. That's tough to get around. My buddy James Cohen and I, who obviously is my business partner on the site, we were talking about this, like, on our podcast. You look at the historical comparables for guys that are in that range. It's like, Devontae Parker, Marvin Jones, Sammy Watkins, not guys that stink or anything, but are probably like average starting NFL receivers at their peaks. And I'm a little worried that, like, well, if George Pickens doesn't take, steps down the line of like could he top out as like a Devontae Parker type of X receiver? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's just kind of understanding where he falls on the X receiver axis I think, and I'm also concerned that the more he played, the worse he got as a separator. That's usually not a good sign. So I think he's a guy that after going through the whole process with him, the whole charting process, I'm coming out a little more concerned about his ceiling perspective, that I think a lot of people are still very tethered to that ceiling potentially being there.
Well, everything's going to be okay because he has Allen Robinson there to learn from, right? He can.
I mean, yeah, hell yeah. I'll definitely work myself into a Allen Robinson has, some sort of more production take than George Pickens by the end of the summer, but that's
Ooh,
months away.
that'd be.
I probably won't, but I do love the Robinson fit as like a big slot receiver. I think what we learned with him in Los Angeles last year is like he can't play the X receiver position anymore, which is obviously, George Pickens' optimal position. Deontay Johnson has played the X receiver position before, even if he has more of like a flanker body type. So they really do need a big slot receiver. And I actually do. I mean, as much as like Robinson has definitely become a punchline in the fantasy circles for what happened last year, he's a professional receiver who has, he actually is like it probably was good to get like a veteran in the room there, especially for a guy like Pickens.
Yeah, he's got pride too, and like you said, the big slot. There are roles on the wide receiver. Speaking of ways things have changed since you started doing reception perception, how long has it been now, Matt? Like 10+ years, I feel like.
Yep. I started, kind of working the process on the back end in
There you
2013
go.
when like you and I first
Yeah,
started talking to
yeah,
each other. So yeah, and I've collected full league wide data since 2014.
right.
So yeah, we're coming up on pretty much like 10 years here. So yeah, a lot has
A
changed
lot
about the
has
position
changed.
in 10 years. That's for sure.
Yeah, it has. I mean, that's what's great about being in tune with the draft. Even fantasy football is by osmosis. You're following, or at least if it's just riding the pendulum or the Ferris wheel, you're feeling that sway. The copycat league, right? The pendulum. Now it's going back towards running the ball and power football, and we always talk about those things in the draft. But I feel like since you've started doing reception perception, Matt, wide receivers become a lot more specialized, and it's a lot
Yep.
more what can you do, and it doesn't necessarily a weakness that you can't do certain things, that you can't run certain parts of the route tree because you just might not be asked to in that role, like DK Metcalf, right? Who cares what routes he can and can't run? Let's talk about how you can use what he can do and leverage that. And maybe Allen Robinson at this point in his career, because I'd imagine that he's going to hopefully give, just like you want for Adam Thielen in Carolina, just give Kenny Pickett some layups, and
Yeah.
what can you do? So yeah, Steelers bringing in Patrick Peterson. We could talk about the Panthers too. You still feeling it? Is your heart still beat Panthers?
No, not really. I
Oh,
mean, I think I'll always have some sort of affinity for them. I'm a little nervous about the Bryce Young. I don't think I've ever said this on air, but
ooh,
like, I definitely think that if Bryce Young doesn't work out, and I'm not saying he's not going to work out, but just because of the size thing, and I feel like it took some factions of that building a little longer to get on board with Bryce than it took the GM and
mhm.
definitely the owner. So like if he doesn't work out, I can already see like the athletic special about this in like 4 years about how sources close to Frank Reich said Bryce Young was really never his guy. And if he's like injured and playing like 10, 11 games per season, but no, but that might just be the scars that you're talking about here. Like, does the heart still beat Panthers? But I do like the way they went about this offseason. I love the coaching staff.
Yeah.
So I hope they're good. I am a big Jonathan Mingo fan
Oh
too.
yeah.
Like he's a great example. He's a great example of what you're just talking about. That like, okay, he doesn't run the 9 route, the deeper routes very well. Although he wins, jump balls contested downfield, but like big time separator on short routes. Like, why can he not be the next great big slot
Right.
receiver in the NFL? Amon-Ra St. Brown was the same way. He's a guy I've compared. Their success rates are very, very similar as prospects, even if I don't necessarily think that it's like a perfect player comparison. He was a great example of a guy that like, okay, he doesn't win down the field necessarily. He's not going to be an X receiver, but Cooper Kupp coming in the league was not going to be like an X receiver.
Right. Right.
And we know what's happened with him. That's why I always called Amon-Ra St. Brown Bud Light Cooper Kupp, because he was basically destined for that same role. Like, you go check the receipts on the website. They're
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, like he can be that guy in that role. And again, because of the routes that he runs and he runs really well, I don't care as much that he's not going to be this big time separating X receiver down the field. And I think Mingo could be the next one there. So yeah, I'm definitely, the way the Panthers went about this offseason, how they made smart decisions, definitely makes me at least more interested in them.
Yeah. And you could conceivably like drive down to Charlotte for a game. It's conceivable.
It's It's equidistant, which is kind of funny because I'm moving to Virginia Beach for the folks who aren't aware. It's actually kind of almost equal distance to go up to Landover,
Yeah.
Maryland, where the Commanders play, and down to Charlotte. It's about 4.5 hours to the dump that is FedEx Field, and then to Bank of America down there in Charlotte. And the Washington Commanders. I never grew up as a Washington fan or anything, but they have so many players that I like from a
Right.
receiver. I mean,
Right.
I love that receiver room. That receiver room is awesome, and I'm just dying for them to get like average quarterback play. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'll ever be a Commanders fan, but I like because they keep finding guys like Curtis Samuel and Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson's first year reception perception is really exciting. Like I'm rooting for that team to figure it out too.
Yeah, we root for. I suppose their teams. There's not like a Yankees in the NFL where you really, for a while, it was the Patriots, I guess, the evil empire. But then they blew up the
Yeah.
Death Star. So, okay. So we were talking. You brought up Jonathan Mingo. This is a good transition, a good segue, because I want to ask you just an open-ended questions and see how it strikes you. Because as you're evaluating rookie receivers, as you are charting this stuff, and your stuff, and folks, if you aren't familiar with the reception perception methodology, and I'm going to make a suggestion. I'm going to be that annoying person, make a suggestion, right? Because the pictures really from the very beginning, reception perception has been excellent, intuitive about conveying information visually with your route tree and your colors and the percentages, and you've got two excellent layers of information with reception perception. One is the success rate on routes, and the other is, and you're probably going to tell me, oh, I already do that. Like subscribe, and you'll see. The other is the percentage of the time they're running that route, right?
Mm-hmm.
So so the next step, Matt, is to make something where like the size of the arrows change by the percentage of that route, but you still preserve the colors, right? So you can see. Go
Yep.
ahead.
No, that's actually an interesting idea, and I have given a lot of thoughts to the chart. What I used to do actually, and I don't know why I don't do this anymore. Maybe because I was told by someone that gifs are ick,
Hmm.
which is apparently what the kids are saying now.
Hmm.
But I used to take like basically just to it shows the success rate and then GIF and it flips over to the route percentage. Very very intricate video design. So I've but I've given a lot of thought to that because number one, I've gotten a little irritated maybe the last year or so with like people will post the route charts and be like, say something's like, oh, that's not a lot. That's too much red on the chart. It's like, no. Again, what we just talked
Right.
about, like that's not everything. Like I always like words greater than colors, So like the colors are supposed to get you in the door to read the profiles where the real information is. And also because I've gotten a lot of feedback about folks, and I mean, I don't know why I just never thought about this, or I thought about it because people keep bringing it up, but like folks that are colorblind, they're
Oh
looking at the
yeah,
charts and like, I don't know what the hell I'm
Dr.
looking at.
G.
So finding some way to show like the arrow size and stuff like that, that is something that we're thinking about
Yeah.
on the back
And
end.
what's great about it in terms of where the rubber meets the road, fantasy football recommendations, right? Rookie drafts and redraft leagues, drafting. What you get is this idea of what we want are big green arrows. We don't care if there are red
Mm-hmm.
arrows as long as those are small arrows, right? And comes
Right.
back to rational usage of a player, which you would think would align with teams drafting a player. You would think that a team would see a player for who he is and say, we want that, as opposed to saying, we think we can turn him into that. This is like a relationship thing. I keep coming back to relationships, right? Like, no, you can't change him, right? Like, just accept him for who he is, and the relationship will be a good relationship. And that's why, and it intersects with fantasy football, because like you said, a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, a guy like Cooper Kupp, and this is where we get tripped up too, because these guys were what, third round, fourth round draft capital. So important at this time of year because it distills down like, what does the NFL think of this player in with this one data point kind of way. And the kinds of skills that they have aren't the kinds of skills that get you drafted in the first round, right? Although there's a side
Mm-hmm.
topic here where I could say, is there even such thing as a number one receiver anymore? Is the concept of a number one receiver even relevant unless you're talking about most often the first read or the player that you design plays around expecting them to win or execute? That's your number one receiver. But a number one receiver used to mean kind of a do everything, come up big in every
Mm-hmm.
situation. You don't need necessarily that because, again, if Amon-Ra St. Brown and Cooper Kupp, if they're parts of the route tree are parts that aren't gaudy. Let's compare them to George Pickens, right? Let's bring this all together. That they're not making highlight reel catches. They're not elevating, the slow motion and the flash bulbs going off. Do they still use flash bulbs anymore in the background where you're making this beautiful? I'm thinking of Lynn Swan or something like that. Like if your
Yeah.
offense isn't predicated on having to make those kinds of catches, if your offense is predicated on just uncovering in these short and intermediate zones and just slicing paper cuts, death by paper cuts, and then that translates to fantasy football production, big time, big time. Go ahead.
No, I would say that the concept of the number one receiver still exists. It's just the parameters of who that player can be has
Yeah.
changed. Just even in the last 10 years. And um, like, I think the guy used to be a player like George Pickens, again, that true number one X receiver, like 6'3 plus, 210 pounds plus, long, lean, like big time guy on the outside. But it's so the routes that you run as that vertical X receiver, the amount of times you face press man coverage, it lends you to running the most high degree of difficulty routes on the team. A couple of good examples, like, the most extreme example is the 2018 Pittsburgh Steelers, where Antonio Brown is like their true blue X receiver, even though he's not built like the prototype, and he's running those routes, and Juju Smith-Schuster is getting those like layup big slot targets. And there was legit discussion back in 2018, is Juju becoming better than Antonio Brown? It's like, that looks crazy. It was crazy at the time, but looks even crazier in hindsight, obviously, although Antonio Brown's career obviously went, kind of whack at the end. But still, like, the difference in those two guys, like, those two might as well be playing different positions, right, based on the coverages they're facing, the routes that they're running, everything like that. Another good example is like, Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper when they were with the Cowboys. Like, Amari Cooper is getting a lot of those layup looks. He's off the line of scrimmage. He can be moved around pre-snap because he's that flanker slot receiver. You think about the routes that Michael Gallup's running, a lot of routes against press, a lot of vertical routes as that X receiver. So it's not to say that makes Michael Gallup better than Amari Cooper, but it just is like he's got a harder assignment. So I think teams have opened their minds to being like, why are we going to try to force this number one receiver role onto guys that are, on the Devontae Parker right access end of the X receiver, when we could get somebody like Cooper Kupp and feed him a boatload of targets, or an Amon-Ra St. Brown and feed him a boatload of targets. Even some of these smaller guys like Tyler Lockett or, Stephon Diggs is not necessarily the prototype. You can run him as the flanker receiver. But yeah, I think that the concept of the number one receiver is still true. It's just the parameters of who that player can be. And I know I've literally learned that lesson with guys like Cooper Kupp's a great example of, like, it's everything has to start at pre-snap, like, alignment. Everything has to start with where these players line up. And then when you realize, like, it doesn't matter if some of these big slot receivers are elite against press man coverage, but if they're incredible zone beaters, that's actually more important than the outside receivers and stuff like that. So yeah, I think the receiver position has changed so much in the last 10 years. And again, it's just the number one receiver still exists. It's just who those guys can be. Matt, like, it's just so much more wide open. And then from like a fantasy sense, it's trying to identify those guys who might fit in that archetype is just as important as trying to find like the alpha number one outside receiver type.
Yeah, or maybe even more, as the NFL's a copycat league, and expect a lot more teams trying to, if it's easier to find what Cooper Kupp and Amon-Ra St. Brown have, then it makes more sense to predicate more of your offense on that. And it seems to make the job easier for the quarterback, it makes the job easier for the offensive line. So expect more of that. And this is why, notice this year, we're going to switch the topic to 2023 rookies. Look at who are the rookies that went in the first round this year. Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. That type, every single one of them fit more as a number one receiver, as in a most frequently targeted, or someone you leverage their abilities to make your offense, make the crank turn in your offense. Those kinds of receivers. And you see in their, Matt, profiles, like, well, might struggle against press man, might not get, might not work outside, not work on contested catches. Well, who cares if that's not the role you're asking? Because one of the things I thought about doing with this show with you, Matt, was do like a rapid fire lightning round kind of thing, where I would say, like, because the thing is, the answer is always, it depends. Because again, Wide receiver is so
Unfortunately, yeah.
specialized. The answer is always it depends. Because I was like in your opinion, in a vacuum, how important in a scouting profile for a college prospect are releases? Is contested catchability? Give me a percentage. Contested catchability. Feet and transitions and routes, right? And it's like, well, what are you going to ask him to do? I can't
Yeah.
answer that until I know what job you're going to give him. Now, with all that in mind, Matt, rookie fits. Now, of course, we're talking about assumption of rational coaching. We're talking about our assumption of rational drafting. That these teams look at the players, see them for who they are. And also, we know enough about most of these offenses to understand what the offensive wide receiver roles are. Rookie fits. Your favorite rookie fit.
I think the player who perfectly encapsulates everything you just said, to a T, is Jordan Addison. Because look, there are definitely, and I agree, it's hard to put a percentage on like what's more important for the. Again, everything starts at role, everything starts at pre-snap alignment, like where these guys are gonna, like the position these guys are gonna play. And I really do, if it's like the one impact I leave on, the football discussion, it's like, talk about these guys, like the X receiver, slot, and flanker, like talk about these guys completely separately. I was actually kind of happy to see AJ Brown say that on like when I think a PFF account was like, who's better, CeeDee Lamb or AJ Brown? And it's like, by the way, I think CeeDee Lamb probably could, and I've talked to CeeDee Lamb about this. Like he takes pride in the fact that, like, I asked him, it's like, do you think people underrate how hard it is, the fact that you have in your career been moved to all three receiver positions at various times? And he's like, yes, it is so yeah, it's really hard. And so I think like CeeDee Lamb could probably play AJ Brown's role, but what you get like, they're just basically playing two different positions with how often he's in the slot versus AJ Brown as a true X receiver. So I hope the players also think this is a smart thing, because I really do think that this is where we have to start all these discussions. And for Addison, like I had legit concerns with if he was going to be like, if a team was going to kind of use him like USC did last year, which like they used him basically, almost exclusively outside. He was on the line of scrimmage again as that X receiver on 58.3% of his sampled snaps and reception perception. And, when he had to run against press coverage on 21.8% of his routes, the results were not good. 17th percentile success rate versus press. And a lot of that came when he was running like true vertical routes, like go routes, 9 routes, where he really struggled with the tight physical, like, I think wide receiver sizeism is stupid. But his lack of size and like elite speed certainly showed up in those isolated situations when he is that X receiver against tight physical press coverage, trying to stack guys to win vertically. He can't really do that well. But let me tell you what, like, I care about that a lot less now that he's going to play as the number 2 flanker receiver and probably some slot as well, across from one of the best receivers on planet Earth in Justin Jefferson. So the looks that he's going to get, I think Kevin O'Connell actually talked about this in the pre-snap or the post-draft presser. The looks he's going to get against zone, against cover 2 on the other side, whether, bracketing Justin Jefferson, and his absolutely absurd success rate on like digs, curls, slants, those in-breaking stuff against zone coverage. That's like what he does best. So there are legit concerns, I think, in Addison's game, but when you actually marry them with what he's probably going to be asked to do with the Vikings, I don't really care about those concerns as much, because he's probably not going to be put in those situations.
Yeah, it's just that simple. It is just that simple. And I'm glad that you mentioned Justin Jefferson, because I want to say it for the record. I try to say it as many times as I can. When our parents or maybe grandparents were kids, there were the dance sensations that swept the nation, right? Do the mashed potato, do the twist. I can't sing, but we don't have dance. Wait, we do. I mean, didn't they start in Fortnite or something, like the dab and all that stuff? I don't even know anymore. I sound like an old man.
It's all in like, I mean, we're going to sound so old right now, but like, I mean, a lot of it's like TikTok dances and stuff like that,
but,
which is, I'm just very
far. But the gritty is universal, right? And the gritty started in New Orleans. I just want to make sure that is stated for the record. So many great. Yeah, can you gritty?
God, no. I think if I bent my knee at that angle, I'd probably shatter it at this point. So I got my whole right side's all messed up, buddy. You know, I'm my knee's bad, my shoulder's bad. Even went to the eye doctor yesterday, and they're like, "Yeah, your eyesight on the right side
Yeah.
is worse than the left." I'm like, "Oh, great!
Yeah.
The whole just cut me down the
Right.
middle
Right.
right
Right.
here, and
Right.
only use what's on the
Yeah,
left."
you're starting to learn what over the hill means, because it's
Yeah, no
but
kidding.
easy when you're going downhill, the going gets a little easier.
There you
So
go.
okay, Jordan Addison, the best rookie fit, and again, you love it. Now, tell me a rookie that after you worked them up and then you saw how long they lasted in the draft, you thought, ooh, some teams are going to regret that. Who's somebody that reception perception had rated pretty highly that the NFL might have underrated?
Yeah, it's got to be Josh Downs. I can't believe Josh Downs lasted till the third round. I'm such a fan of him. You know, number one in success rate versus man in the class. Again, like talk about wide receiver sizeism. He's the perfect example of why I think it's stupid because it's like, oh, he smaller guy. Like, can he play against press coverage? Well, his collegiate sample for reception perception, 76.9% success rate versus press. That was one of the top marks in the class. You know, 86th percentile in RP history, 75.2% success rate versus man. He definitely shows the ability, much in like a Tyler Lockett type of way, to win against physical press man coverage despite the lack of size. You know, he shows an ability to get downfield, the intermediate routes, on out routes, corner routes, stuff like that. Like the work that he'll do, and he might primarily be a slot receiver. I'm not trying to tell you that despite the size, he's going to be, an X receiver or something like that. So there are obviously optimal roles for him. And then the kicker for me too, he had the highest contested catch rate among the guys I charted, despite the fact that he's 5'9", 171
Mm-hmm.
pounds. And if we really wanted to go on like a long rant here, we'd talk about my thoughts on player weight, which is like, yep, they measure in this one time at the combine, and that's definitely what they're going to be forever.
Yeah.
Like that. That's yeah, but. Despite talk about over the hill.
Uh-huh.
Anyways, so
Uh-huh.
yeah, I think I think you just see so many good things from Josh Downs, and I get it. Like one thing I would definitely caution people against is, you're going to see, okay, he's 5'9", 171 pounds. And then, he went in the third round, like draft, like you said, draft capital. So important. You're going to count those two things as two negatives. But I think the reason he went in the third round is because he's 5'9", 171 pounds. So like, that's really all just like one negative. But what you see in his reception perception profile, which as you mentioned is what you see on the film, what you see on the field, shows you I think he's going to be a very, very good NFL player. Like, what's his ceiling? I don't know. My comp for him was Sterling Shepard, which, I love Sterling Shepard.
What could Sterling Shepard have been without the catastrophic injuries? Let's add that to the Sterling Shepard story. We never got to see what Sterling Shepard could have been in the NFL.
Yeah, and I mean, Sterling Shepard's like a long-time reception perception favorite, so I definitely know that better than anybody. It's a great point. Also, the timing of his injuries, too. He wasn't a guy that ever really got banged up until the moment they traded Odell Beckham, and then it's like, then he starts getting hurt. Really kind of the moment where he should have started flying. But also, by the way, anytime Sterling Shepard's on the field, even if it's 3 games a season, like you can book 10 targets are going his way because he's always open. And I think Josh Downs can be that type of guy, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you're hinting at the player weight rant. Why subscribe to the reception perception for the old man rants? Join us, one of us. No, but I mean the thing is, again, the game is changing. The game is changing. So some of the mighty might type players have a place where they might not have had a place in the past. Of course, the reaction to that is, again, more 2 tight end sets, more running the ball, and the pendulum. And that's why the NFL. I always go back to that Chuck Klosterman piece. Someone asked me why the NFL. I can't remember. It was on ESPN. It's basically just it's always changing. It's always the NFL is always in motion, never at rest. And by the way, just as a quick aside, how much fun could this indie offense be? Ooh,
Oh,
ooh, ooh! Like, I gotta fan myself because you think about Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman and Josh Downs and Jelani Woods and a Jonathan Taylor power running game, and then you also have the most athletic quarterback in the history of the league, probably, and Shane Steichen. I mean, seriously, okay, Shane Steichen going from Jalen Hurts to Anthony Richardson. It's like going from the 8 crayon box to like the 64 color crayon box, right?
yeah.
So,
Yeah. And you already showed you could do great work with that. Color a really good picture with the 8 crayon box. Like imagine, what you could do with all of the colors.
yeah, that's going to be fun. I'm rooting for that. I'm totally rooting for that.
I think that receiver room, by the way, is probably one of the most underrated
Oh,
rooms in the
and
league. And
young.
obviously, a lot of it is, a lot of it's potential still. I get that, but they're a great example of what we've kind of hinted at this entire conversation, which is that like not only is it important to keep your mind open about who number one receivers could be, or, not type guys based on size, it's also super important to build a receiver room, I think, that's complementary. And I
Mhm.
think this room is one of the most
Oh,
complementary rooms in the entire NFL. I mean, Alec Pierce, by the way, you want to talk about a second year receiver and like a hot take. The if you look at dynasty rankings, and you see how high George Pickens is, and then you see how low Alec Pierce is, and then you
same
actually look at
guy.
like they're basically
Yeah.
the same guy, especially their reception perception data. And like Pierce actually has a couple of better indicators. And that's not to say I'm like super, super high on Alec Pierce or anything, but I think he's so funny because, his collegiate profile, Bloom, I always compare him to like the bad takes on DK Metcalf
Mhm, mhm.
before his draft. Like he can only run slants, posts, and goes, and he's a big receiver that struggles to kind of throttle down. It's like DK Metcalf was never really that guy, but Alec Pierce literally is that
Mhm,
guy,
mhm.
and he was that exact player as a rookie too. Who can obviously win jump balls as well. He's a pure like X receiver ball winner down the field. And Michael Pittman, I love Michael Pittman's game. Big receiver who can separate in the short to intermediate game, and then you get a super slot receiver in Josh Downs. Again, a lot of it is potential, but I think that receiver room has the potential to be one of the better rooms in the NFL. And if Anthony Richardson hits, it's like, yeah, this is actually a really good setup for him.
Yeah. Oh, it's excellent. I mean, we were talking about the surroundings for Desmond Ritter. Now the offensive line. Ask
We'll see.
ask Andrew Luck about that. We'll see. I mean, that's one of the reasons you like that Atlanta situation too, at least as a run blocking line or an offensive line, that what they asked them to do. Carolina's line is going to be pretty solid. I think they've got
Pretty good.
some
Yep.
good pieces in place there too. Okay. Uh, we're kind of going off the rails early, but not really because it's football. But you mentioned earlier talking to players. And it's awesome, by the way. We'll just get real for a second. I'm gonna give you a hug, my nephew. It's just awesome, man. It's just awesome. I mean, what I especially love seeing you interacting so much with players is just how comfortable you are. You're just very comfortable, and I think it makes the players comfortable. And I think it makes for something good and something that stands out a little bit from most of what's out there when you talk about people who have access. But you've got access now. How has it changed what you do?
Definitely so many ways, and it's funny you bring up the comfortable part. I'm glad it looks like I'm comfortable, and I'm definitely more comfortable now than I was, like again 5-6 years ago, something like that. But it's kind of funny because whenever you talk to players, like you want like you said, so much of interviews can be really bad, and like especially in times, like a great example is at the Super Bowl this past year. These guys on Radio Row, they're doing like 5, 6, 7 interviews a day, hawking, Gatorade or something. Sorry, sponsors, but something they probably don't even really care about. And they're getting asked the same questions over and over and over again. So I made a point this year, talking to guys like tons of dudes, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, name drop after name drop here. But like, asking them like, what's the one question that you've been getting asked that you don't want to,
Right,
that you
right.
don't want to talk about? Which, by the way, is kind of a way to get them to talk about the topic because
Sure.
they end up talking about it anyways. But also, it's like, okay, this guy doesn't want me to, is not trying to like get a sound bite out of me. He's not trying to use me for something. Like we're just having a conversation here. So that's a fun way to sort of get into it. But that's advice for folks that have to interview players is like, don't try to just. And it's funny. Sometimes you learn something. Like Jamar Chase is great. He said, "I don't want to talk about like my friendship with Joe Burrow," and I was like, "Okay, cool. Like I'm not going to ask you about Joe Burrow then because you probably been asked 20 times a day and you're sick
Yeah,
of it."
yeah.
But I think the thing I've learned most is just again how human of a process this is for these guys. And well, number one, it's also made me kind of super sensitive about how people talk about
Yeah.
players and how I talk about players. Like I don't want to get out there and just be like, this guy sucks
Mhm.
or like this guy's trash, and I actually used to say, I said on like, it's like goofball receiver or whatever. And, I kind of had to like check myself of like, well, isn't that kind of the same thing of what I don't like doing. So I try not to say that as much anymore, but like, yeah, man, I think the biggest thing is just how we talk about these guys
Mhm.
because they are legitimate human beings, and people, think that's like, I'm not like the biggest white knight in the world or anything like that. Like I'm not looking for a back pat or anything, but I just think like that's just one thing to do to show respect. I mean, you
Yeah.
and Cecil always kind of talked about this, and like it's about the game and it's about the play. Like it's about the players. Like it's not about you or your little fantasy team or anything like that. As much as those things are cool and we love them, like the glory goes to the players. The glory goes to the game. I think that's something I always took from you guys coming up, at Football Guys, and I think that's really important. And especially when you actually talk to these guys, like you just learn like how much work goes into it too,
Mm-hmm.
which makes you respect the product even more. And like, I also think that there's just it makes you kind of like also realize so much bullshit goes into.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Joe.
Uh-huh.
So much BS goes into
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So much edit that out. So much BS goes into the process. I don't know if that also
Uh-huh.
deserves a sorry, Joe. But like, the injury report, right? Like we talk about the injury report as if it's like this sacred document that like that's where we'll glean all the truth is from the injury report. When we finally get the final injury report on Friday, that's when we'll really know. But like I did the show with Austin Eckler this past year, and like in our pre-show production meetings, I'd ask like, how you doing, buddy? What's going on? And, he's, my neck hurts, my hamstring hurts, my this, like going on things. I'm like, by the way, you look at the injury report, none of
Fully
those things are
practice
on
it.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fully practicing, so like he is 100% good to go.
Yeah.
And just like that's a perfect example of like we really don't know what these
No.
guys are going through and grinding through on like a daily basis. And that's even just from a physical level too. There's a real mental toll that this takes, just like any job takes a mental toll, and this one is like mental and physical. So there's just I think more respect for the players is something that I have I don't know, I've really tried to bring into my work
Yeah.
through talking to these guys.
Yeah. I'm thinking of my late father, Sigmund Bloom. Be a human being. Be a human being. Be a human being. Be
Yeah.
present. You mentioned that question you asked, your icebreaker question. It's a great one though, because you're treating the player as a human being. Hey,
Right.
you're a human being having an experience. I'm a human being having an experience. How's this experience going for you? As opposed to give me something that I can package and sell as a product, right?
Right. Yeah, because that's what's going on, especially in these giant, like the Radio Road Super Bowl. For most folks who've never been there, it's like you go into a giant convention center, and every like small to medium to big media thing is there, whether it's some local radio station at a tiny kind of table, whether it's like my Yahoo booth or like NFL Network, ESPN, like a whole stage, Pat McAfee show, a whole
Mm-hmm.
stage built in. Like it's a crazy experience. And yeah, these guys come in there because they're getting paid to do it. So
Well,
it's
it's the
not like it's a
commodification of the NFL. Yeah, it's an
yeah,
assembly
they're getting.
line.
It is. I was to say assembly line. Like if you really want to be crude about it, like a meat market of they're
Oh
coming in
yeah.
there and they're hopping to each thing, hawking. Like I said, some kind of product, whatever. Yeah, and they're getting asked a lot of the same stuff over and over again. I also think too, like the players' relationship to football, I think is a fascinating one too, because
Mm.
yeah, some of these guys don't want to come in there and talk about. A lot of those guys at Super Bowl are like, we don't want to talk about the Super Bowl. Like, Christian McCaffrey's like, I hope both teams lose.
Right.
Like,
Right. Right. Right.
that's an interesting thing too. But yeah, it's just I want to be the one person they talk to that they don't feel like that just wants to
Yeah.
have a conversation about
Exactly.
football and not wants to not. I want to get something out of them, but I want to learn something from them about the game that I can apply to my work. And I don't know. I hope they come away from that conversation being like, yeah, that was a good talk, and I don't feel like this guy was trying to get something from me. And also, I mean, I would like to, like when Jamar Chase asked me about like certain routes, and it's like, yeah, you probably don't know what that is. I'm like, oh, actually,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Sure.
I hope that happens as well.
Yeah, well, and then, I mean, I know a little bit about your craft, and I respect it, and I admire it. Yeah, I think that who I was thinking about while you were depicting all that. Our president, Marshawn Lynch, right? I'm just here so I don't get
Oh
fined.
yeah, exactly.
I'm just
Yeah,
here so I don't
right,
get
right.
fined. I mean, he's really breaking. He's being subversive. He's all. There's a bunch of stuff. See, we talk about commodification, or you call it a meat market. There's stuff, the kind of stuff they're banning from teaching in schools now. Public schools is the kind of stuff we could start talking about right now,
Yeah,
where there's a lot of layers to this. And Marshawn Lynch is actually being really subversive when he shows up and doesn't participate, except the very bare minimum that they require from him. I'm just here so I don't get fined. Yeah, see, when you see a human being, I'm reminded of when I used to cover the All-Star games and on the college road trip. And
mm-hmm.
there was one player in Texas versus the Nation one year, and it was Wednesday, we were down in the lobby of the Hilton Garden Inn. Love El Paso. My wife, love of my life, is from El Paso. El Paso is a great place. I love the high desert. Love New Mexico too. El Paso should be part of New Mexico. Anyway, I just sat down on the couch with
Oh
him.
yeah.
On the couch, it's kind of funny. I didn't realize that until now. I sat down on one of the couches with him and just started talking to him about like how's it going. Like, I wasn't taking any notes. I wasn't talking to him as a football analyst, and you could see he exhaled. I mean, they're under tremendous amounts of pressure that a lot of us probably
Yeah.
won't understand for our entire lives.
Especially the prospects. That's so
Oh,
true.
especially the prospects at a place like Texas versus the Nation, where they're on the fringe of just trying to get invited to a camp, maybe. They're just trying to give
Mm-hmm.
someone to give them a chance. I remember that's when I met Andrew Hawkins. He's awesome, by the way. I haven't mentioned Andrew
Oh,
Hawkins
nice.
enough in a long time. Andrew Hawkins is fantastic. I'll never forget one of my G Wiz moments back then was when Andrew Hawkins said, "See, so Sigmund, you know who we are? Oh yeah, like you Andrew Hawkins." Anyway, to see a human being, we can all do that in our life more every day, right? Whether it's our job
Yeah.
or people we meet. That's one of the things I love about New Orleans. There's always an acknowledgement of the humanity. Namaste, right? The universe in me, the universe in you. And something I'm really fond of saying these days as an old man is you don't decide the story you're dropped into, but you decide the part you play in the story. And hopefully the part that we all play is acknowledging humanity a little bit more. But I want to take it back to another sort of pointed question to just set it up for you. In all of your interactions, and I know there's probably stuff you would want to share, at least the juicy stuff, but the privacy is important,
Mm-hmm.
and respecting player privacy. So with the limit of respecting player privacy, what is something that in your interactions with players that you've learned or experienced that surprised you about a player?
Ooh. Surprised me about a player. That's a good one. And yeah, there
You don't have to get specific
some
even. I mean, you can make a
some
hey,
some some of yeah, no, some of the Jamar Chase stuff is I got some good stuff about that, but I can't share on air. But I think just interactions with players, it's sort of as like one specific one that I can talk about is Stephon Diggs is a guy I've gotten to talk about a lot. I got to talk to a lot over the years. And he and I have bonded over reception perception's appreciation of his game, right? Like, and
mhm,
I think over the years, like I remember the first time we met was when he was just coming off that like crazy. I think the Vikings playoff run where he had the game against New Orleans, but it's almost like, yeah, you were number one in success rate versus man coverage, and like that was the first time we met and talked about reception perception. I think that the players go on like a journey with football as well, and that
mhm,
that sort of surprised me. Like talking to him in his Vikings days and what he wanted and expected from quarterbacks versus what his relationship has evolved with Josh Allen. And then there was a time too where I got to actually talk to Josh Allen for Eckler's Edge with Austin this year, and I asked him like, what's your relationship on field relationship like with Stephon, because he's a guy I talked to over the years, and he was funny because he's like, some quarterbacks really care about like route depth. And like you've got to be at 8. If this is an 8-yard curl, you better be at 8 yards.
mhm,
You're
mhm.
you're supposed to break. You're supposed to break in at 10 routes on the dig. Like you better be at 10 yards. He's like, I don't care about that with Steph. Like just go run and get open, right? And I think like, and he said he's like, I never. He also was like, I don't think I would have thought about that way about playing the position like 4 or 5 years ago or something. But I think that's funny, like the way that players, that surprised me a little bit, that like, and I think it seems like kind of intuitive, but again, we treat players so much as like robots and spreadsheets and numbers and stuff like that. But sometimes guys get with another player, especially quarterback wide receiver relationship is so important like this. But sometimes guys get with another player, they get with a coach, or they get with an organization, or just their own experiences changes the way that they interact with football. And I think that's really cool because we have that experience, right? Like,
Yes,
especially,
it's a
we have that experience on
microcosm.
the
Yeah,
outside. Yeah.
it's life.
So I think that's one.
It's
Yeah,
life.
that's a good one of just, yeah, these guys have that same sort of experience with the game, that like they're always learning about something, especially the great ones that really do love the game. Like they have that same sort of appreciation of it that I think, we do and your listeners do and Football Guys subscribers do.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, as we go through life, I mean, someone can help you rediscover things you love about life, or you can be miserable because of the people around you in your life and and disconnects and discord in those relationships. And I can't remember. I feel like I don't even know what actually has happened and what hasn't. It's all I'm 47 now, and it's all blending together. I don't know, maybe too many drugs or something. But I feel like in a Hall of Fame speech, I heard someone say it's the NFL at its essence is about relationships. And I think
Yeah.
that's so true. The simplest truths, the secrets of the universe aren't secret. They're just right there on the surface, and we see them so often that we overlook them. And relationships are important, and this can help you as a fantasy football player, understanding these relationships. And On the Couch is about relationships, and Football Guys is about relationships. And one of my favorite relationships in our football world, always with Matt Harmon, reception perception, and of course, we always love spending time together. We love spending time with you. The draft has happened. We've exhaled. We're still here. We're going to be back here every week on the Couch, Football Guys, and the whole football world there for you. We love you so because you're so classy.